Okay. Hello, Doug. I am so glad you are here today. And I would love to start off with telling you why. I recently dove into the world of online learning because I've always wanted to teach some of the stuff that I know. And I thought, this is the perfect venue. So as I was researching tools, I came across your verbal to visual website. And I was like, this is a beautiful, simple description of what happens here. And I was very, thought that was very appealing. And then I actually decided, well, I'm just going to join your community for a week to see how you're doing things. Well, a week went by and I thought, just to back up, what Doug's community does is he does sketchnoting, basically, teaches sketchnoting. And so I thought, sketchnoting, it's interesting, but I didn't think it applied, right? Well, I actually took one of your courses and I started to sketchnote, and in 10 minutes, I was hooked. I was like, this is exactly what I need, and I didn't even know it. And then the community was so welcoming. What you're providing is so interesting, amazing, worthwhile. I ended up staying and, bought a monthly subscription, and I love it. So then the more I started to take the courses and chat with other people in the community, I was just intrigued by your whole ness, what you do and how you do it. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got here and how you describe what you
do? Yeah, big questions. But thank you, first of all, for those kind words about what's going on inside of verbal to visual. How I got here. So my path, my professional path, one avenue that I started to go down but ultimately did not was high school teaching. I went to graduate school for that, got certified to teach high school math, physics, and English as a foreign language. Have always enjoyed education personally and found that I enjoyed teaching as well. But after a pretty intense graduate school experience, especially like the student teaching, where I bit off much more than I could chew, had some qualms about entering that profession full time. So instead did a bunch of substitute teaching after I finished that program. First down in the Eugene area. I live in Oregon.
That's where I went to school. I graduated from U of O.
Hey, great. Yeah. I grew up in a small town 10 miles southeast of Eugene called Pleasant Hill.
Oh, yeah.
But Eugene was, that's
the
where
big
we
city.
would go into town. Yeah, it was a big city. I did some substitute teaching there. Not too long after that, I moved up to Portland because that's where a lot of my college and high school friends were kind of gravitating, and I was ready to be in a place outside of where I grew up. Kept substitute teaching, got in pretty well with a couple of high schools, and ended up doing a long-term sub gig for a math teacher that was going out on paternity leave, I think it was, and had kind of a similar, semi-traumatic experience there that kind of just reinforced that particular setting just didn't feel like the best fit for me. So then that's kind of when I started to explore other options, and I can't remember which came first, whether the Google search of like how to make money online came first, or the coming across a very specific TED Talk. Often what I would do after a day of substitute teaching is I would go to a coffee shop and read or watch TED Talks and like kind of try to figure out what I wanted to do next with my life. And during one of those, I saw a talk by Sunni called Doodlers Unite. super short, like 6-minute TED Talk describing this power of doodling, of drawing, of sketching out ideas and not just writing them down, and how good that is for your brain, for your body. I wasn't an artistic kid growing up. At some points in like early adulthood, I kind of got a little bit interested in drawing and did some of that. But something clicked when I saw that video. The combination of wanting to develop this creative skill, but then also a creative skill that met a specific need that I had recognized a handful of years before, where, you know, you read a book that you really enjoy and you're inspired by the ideas, and maybe for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, you feel like they stay fresh and you're able to kind of apply them. But it surprised me how quickly those ideas just faded away. Mm-hmm. And I kind of forgot. I could maybe like describe a sentence description of the book, but I couldn't dig into any of the details. I wasn't sure if I was applying what I learned initially.
I think a lot of us can relate to that.
Oh yeah. Same is true, maybe even like, you know, podcast listening, whatever way you kind of consume information. It just wasn't sticking in the way that I kind of hoped it would. So when I saw this concept of purposeful doodling, eventually came across the term sketchnoting, which was coined by a guy named Mike Rohde, who's been doing this since kind of the early 2000s and wrote a book on the topic of sketchnoting and has been a great supporter of the visual thinking and sketchnoting community since then. Once I came across all that, it was easy for me to pinpoint, okay, this might be the type of skill that I want to develop and kind of creative outlet that I hadn't had before. And yeah, I was kind of hooked from the get-go, did a lot of experimenting on my own, and then eventually decided to kind of bring teaching back in, kind of merge my interest and little bit of experience in teaching with this kind of new passion for visual note-taking, and kind of started creating my own instructional videos at first, just with a YouTube channel, and then kind of slowly building courses. And then the shift to what you experienced was relatively recent. At the beginning of the pandemic was when I kind of moved where I was teaching, moved all of my online courses over to a platform called Mighty Networks, which is one of the spaces that kind of online creators and community builders like us can set up as a learning community, where you can have things like online courses that folks can plug away at their own pace, but you can also have these community elements where anyone who joins can share their work, ask questions, chat with other people, maybe meet in live weekly events, which is one of the things that we do. So the transition to that platform, which coincided with the early stage of the pandemic, when it felt like there was a need for community. Again, it was kind of another one of those timings where I was already wanting more community with the teaching that I was doing. And then there seemed to be a need for it, and generally in the world. So that kind of led to a shift that's a stronger blend now of courses and community. Whereas prior to that, even though there had been some community elements, it was much more kind of course focused.
Right.
So I've enjoyed quite a bit that deepening of the community component of kind of how I explore sketchnoting, and get to share it with others, and also learn from what other folks are doing when they come in and share their work. So
I think that's the most amazing thing about community, is that there's a symbiosis and a synchronicity that kind of all comes together in a community, where the output of the community is so much greater than the input of any, one person, or what one person could output on their own.
Oh yeah.
And to me, it's the most exciting thing about creating community. And I think what's cool, you brought up Mighty Networks, and I'm in the process of building a Mighty Network of my own, is that when you move that community away from social media and into something that's more personalized, more driven by like a common connection rather than a common connector, the platform, I think it's so much more powerful. And it's what so many people go to social media looking for. We want that connection, right? We want that, that we want to experience life with other people. And you don't really get that through social media. And I know last year you quit social media. Can you talk to me a little bit about why you did that and what the result has been?
Yeah. I kind of feel like that was somewhat of a progression, starting a handful of years ago. Like thinking about my experience on social media, I feel like some of the inflection points were here in the US around 2016, that presidential election cycle, got a lot of people fired up for good reason. And I feel like in that period, that's the most almost like combative I've ever felt in online interactions, even if I'm, not even commenting on things or participating, just observing what's going on. And, the anxiety around that. So the experience of social media has a lot of layers to it. Of course, there's whatever's going on locally, nationally, globally, and how you relate to that. But then for a person who is creating and putting their own work out on the internet, there's also the dynamics of what it feels like to post your latest thing, how often you check it to see how many likes or retweets or whatever it got.
Right.
And none of those experiences felt good. None of those layers really felt very good to me. So I kind of started peeling back, like first got rid of Facebook. But then for a while after that, I still used Twitter and Instagram, mostly for sharing sketchnoting related things.
Sure.
Pretty much exclusively for that. But then still there, I noticed that it just didn't feel good to spend time there. And it felt like a distraction and to a degree like a waste of energy, not only during the time spent on those platforms, but the residual feeling that stuck with me.
Yeah, there's a hangover.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I think that the lack of that hangover was the biggest sigh of relief when I chose to just fully delete Twitter and Instagram. It was like a burden off my shoulders. It was so refreshing to not have to pay attention to that.
Right. And what was so great is that you didn't just bail. You didn't just say, I'm out of here, forget it. You went and created other things. Like you dove into your YouTube channel, which is great and of service. And YouTube is kind of a different beast when it comes. It isn't social media. It's social sharing, but it's different. It's also a search engine. So you can really kind of provide things that people are looking for in a way that they aren't when they're just zoning out, going like this. And of course, I saw that for myself in 2019. I started an anonymous Twitter channel that got pretty popular. But it was all about venting my own frustration and anger. So there was satisfaction in putting these things out there and having other people go, yeah. But then I also realized there was a dark side to it, and there was something that was pulling me into this echo chamber that I didn't like. And so I got rid of that, deleted the account, and that was that. But then last year, I started on TikTok because a friend of mine was like, you should do TikTok. And that ended up being the most strange, surreal, but wonderful experience of like over the course of a year being introduced to all these people who I never would have met otherwise, mostly Gen X women. I'm sorry, not Gen X, Gen Z women. I'm like the oldest end of Gen X.
Gotcha.
And so I didn't have too many Gen Z women in my life. And they looked at me like a grandpa. And I was like, I don't have any kids, you know, I'm gay. I wasn't like, kids weren't a part of my life, you know, like my adult life. And so meeting these kids and being able to kind of support them in a way they asked for and wanted to be supported. They're like, would you be my grandpa? I was like, absolutely. I will be your TikTok grandpa. It has been so satisfying, you know, to put out videos that just make people feel a little better, you know, and just share a little bit of like what's important to me in life has been really, really good. That said, TikTok is weird, and I'm really looking forward to bringing that doing kind of what you did is getting, instead of having such a wide reach, I would like to focus more on the people who really want to dive deeper into these things. And I still see a place for social media to sort of introduce concepts
Absolutely.
like that. That synchronicity, that, you know, the way I found you, you know, and I noticed you still write on Medium, which is also a great way to find people. So I think that's important, but I do think, like, as a creator, it's good to have ways of people stumbling onto your stuff, because that's part of the magic of the internet, right? So with getting rid of social media, and diving more into YouTube, can you talk a little bit about what YouTube has meant for you as a platform versus social media, and like as a creator, what the value is?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what to some degree allowed me to delete Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter came from the fact that I knew that the way that people were finding out about my work was through YouTube. So, you know, for different types of online creators, you know, you might enjoy using Twitter as a place to share your work, or Instagram, or like, you know, kind of, so long as you have at least one place where you can share work that you enjoy and like people can find you there. I think that like is an important piece to anyone doing this kind of creator thing. But it's nice that you don't have to be everywhere. So like when I recognized just through like real simple website analytics that like, okay, I think after Google search, like YouTube was the next highest refer. That's how people were making it to verbaltovisual.com. And then just anecdotally, when people would join the Mighty Network and they would share how they found out about me, it would be through YouTube. So that gave me confidence in the kind of focusing on that platform.
Sure.
And it's the thing that making sketched videos where, you know, sometimes I'm not showing my face, you're just seeing me sketch things out and I'm talking through ideas, making videos like that, sometimes putting my face on camera and telling different types of stories, sharing different ideas, sometimes my own, sometimes from the books I'm reading. It's the maybe outside of like just sketchnoting. It's the type of thing that I enjoy creating the most. And I feel like it is that sweet spot too of the thing that I enjoy making the most and has the potential for the most amount of impact once I put it out there, in terms of people who might find it now, maybe 2 years from now, maybe 10 years from now, if YouTube is still around then. So there's that. Just it's at the intersection of the kind of important circles.
That totally makes sense. Can you talk a little bit about that journey that you took from being a dissatisfied teacher to, I saw one of your videos where you said when you first started making videos, you didn't want to be in them. Like you weren't comfortable being in front of the camera. And I sort of did the same thing with my TikTok. I was just like, oh, let's turn the camera the other way. But I know there's a lot of people, especially right now, that are looking for a way to switch it up, to maybe make a little extra money doing something on the side, to move from something, or teachers, for example. So many teachers are leaving teaching right now, partly because of their frustration around it, partly because it just doesn't pay that well. If there were teachers who could teach online, that could be helpful, right? And that's something kind of you do. But you've taken that journey too. And can you talk to me about like what that was to go into the unknown of it, and maybe some of what you learned?
Yeah, it was definitely a tumultuous process at times that didn't necessarily click right away, and even just coming back down to like the financials of it, I kind of still remember what it felt like to go from substitute teaching, where I had developed enough of stability there, where I knew enough teachers and enough schools that like I could get consistent enough gigs to support myself. The moment I decided to stop doing that completely and kind of lean in, on the other hand, like fully into sketchnoting, there was excitement in that freedom. But then the first thing you're kind of confronted with is when that space opens up to dedicate your full time to what previously had been a side gig, like a passion project, it changes the dynamics of it, especially if you kind of need to rely on it financially. And you realize, oh, it's kind of hard to like figure out how to spend your days when there aren't other external structures that are supporting what you're doing. Right. Time structures, colleagues,
and a paycheck.
And like the best practices for how to do your job, people giving you input on what to improve on or what to keep doing. So there's so much to figure out when you step into that space of trying to support yourself with your own work. And I fumbled around for years in that space before I started kind of making some money off of teaching. I did some freelance gigs within the realm of there's a profession called graphic recording, which has been around kind of longer than the term sketchnoting. A graphic recorder is someone who will show up to a conference or a meeting where people are having conversations or presenting ideas, and the graphic recorder will throw a big poster paper up on the wall and sketch out in large scale for an audience, just kind of capture the ideas in a visual way as kind of a common reference point to keep folks on the same page, help that group of people work toward whatever goal it is that they're gathered for. Really interesting profession. Some pressure to it to show up live, and sometimes you have some background on what's going on. Sure. Sometimes maybe less so. So I did some of those gigs to experiment with if that was something that I wanted to do more of. That helped a little bit kind of with the financial side of things, but kind of with my experience in kind of traditional teaching didn't feel quite right. And then it was kind of a chance encounter that led me to becoming interested in making videos. And this is going to speak to the benefits of a social media platform like Twitter. I was, I came across, this is kind of a spin-off of being interested in TED Talks. I learned that there was a local TEDx talk in Portland. It turns out there are a couple of different TEDx talks. And the one that I bought a ticket for. At the time, it was called TEDx Concordia U Portland, because it was based out of Concordia University. Eventually changed its name to TEDx Mount Hood. Bought a ticket to that. I was like, okay, this is a cool event. I'm just going to go on my own and like sketchnote the talks. I put a tweet out and just said like, just got my tickets for TEDx Concordia U Portland, excited to go and like practice my live sketchnoting skills there. One of the organizers of the event saw that and knew it maybe had some reference for sketchnoting to know what that meant. And as it turns out, they'd kind of been maybe looking for someone to do something a little more visual, like at the event. So we met up for coffee, kind of explored how we might collaborate together, what I might be able to kind of contribute to this event. And one of the things that we did was we made these pretty cool, this is probably one of like my favorite projects that I've ever done. We made these little like intro videos for each speaker that was played right before they walked on stage. And in that video, I am like sketching out a little like portrait of the speaker and the title of their talk and a little visual connected to their talk.
How cool.
And for that one, like there was a person who came in that had the video experience to like set up the camera above our desk, and he did all the recording and editing. But I did that sketchnoting, and then I got to go to the event, and it was really cool to see your work,
Sure.
be in this space with a bunch of people, see your work for, 10 seconds, up before each speaker came on. And, that was very exciting and kind of started the bug for like, oh, making videos, that might be something that I want to do. So yeah, that's kind of what eventually led me to.
What a great story. And
in that direction.
I find myself telling this to people all the time when they ask me about how did you get to where you are. People normally want to know, what are the actual things you did? And I always say, it doesn't really matter, because if you did the things I did, you might get something completely different anyway. But there are definitely, I think it's more like attitudes and more general things, like putting yourself out there. For example, that creates that synchronicity where something you just don't even think about can happen that can change your whole life. You see a TED Talk, you decide to become a sketchnoter. You get on Twitter and say you're going to a TED Talk, and then that first TED Talk changes into being something that's going to turn into your life's work, for a while anyway. I mean, who knows,
Yeah.
Hopefully you'll live a good long life, and maybe you'll do other things. But I think that is something that's so underrated, but so important, because we all tend to focus on the what and the how. What do I do? How do I do it? Show me the thing. And what I love about your work is that it's a few things, actually. I love how transparent you are, your whole like learning in public thing. And I want to talk a little bit about that. And I love how like you're just, you're willing to try new things, and I think that's undervalued. That's undervalued. So actually, let's talk about that now then, the learning in public, because so many of us are afraid of not being an expert. So we won't, and I've come across this myself in putting together, teaching and things like that. I'm like, oh, you get that imposter syndrome, and it's universal. Everyone knows what that feels like. You have a great way of working past that. And can you share some of how that works for you in your life?
Yeah. Interestingly, that kind of brings us back to the Google search of like, how do you make money online? Where at the time, this was like 2011, I probably did that Google search. There's probably a lot of bad information then as there is now about how to make
Right.
money online.
Just watch YouTube videos. You make $10,000 a month doing what you're doing now. Not really.
I stumbled across some helpful advice. It was like, okay, it's not going to be quick and easy. Like, it's going to take time. Be prepared to be in it for the long haul. So that was some helpful framing, that I wasn't looking for immediate financial glory, I suppose. And also, I'm pretty sure it was the same day that I saw that Sunni Brown talk, Doodlers Unite. After some like Google search and exploring that, I came across the profession and the term graphic recording, and then like did some website searches and noticed that the URL thegraphicrecorder.com was available. So I was like, I'm going to buy that domain and I'm going to start blogging about my experience developing these skills. And that's where this concept of learning in public came from. That came from my experience of starting this blog with the explicit intention and framing of, I'm a guy learning this new skill for these reasons, because I think it's interesting and like this creative outlet, but I'm just learning and here's how it's going. That's, I think, a way to like sidestep the imposter syndrome.
Sure.
Is that you're approaching it from the perspective of a newbie. And it just like frees you up to share work that you maybe think is bad, or that you know isn't ultimately like where you want to, the type of thing you want to be creating. You're on your way there. A lot of people might be familiar with the kind of Ira Glass quote on storytelling, is that like when you first start making any sort of art, there's this huge chasm between your work and your taste.
Right.
So the work that you're able to produce is so far away from like what you know to be good work. And you just got to fill that chasm with like lots and lots of work. There is something nice about like, okay, as you're filling that chasm, like write a blog post about it, share it in some way, like document what that process is like as you bridge that gap. Because not only can that process of documenting kind of put you in that reflection mode that I think supports your journey, will help you decide what to do next, what skill to build, what to experiment with. Like that reflecting and sharing has its own internal benefit to your process. But then since you're putting work out there, it's more likely that over time, like people are going to stumble upon your work. And that's what happened with the graphic recorder, which is where, you know, I initially just started an email newsletter from there. And then, and that was where that was when I was experimenting with kind of starting to do freelance gigs. But once I decided that I wanted to teach this skill, that's when it felt like a good time to start a new project, give it a new name. That's when kind of verbal to visual came into being, and that became the home of the teaching and the exploring these skills in community with other people.
Yeah, and
having that space.
When you're doing that in that space, you're also giving permission to the people who are watching to do the same thing. You know, like it's this saying, "Hey, I'm gonna jump in first, but the water's fine. Come on in." You know, and I love that about that. And it to me, the whole concept of it just took so much pressure off of when you said it. I was like, okay, cool. Because switching from, I just recently got certified as a mindfulness teacher. I've taught different things throughout my life, but teaching this thing now, being new at it, but also, you know, knowing that I know how to do this, I was really bumping up against this again, you know, that like, how do I get from here to there? And the whole idea of learning in public is so great. And so I've really started bringing that into my own social media posts about, you know, my own struggles, and kind of just talking about what I'm learning and how my struggles apply to that, and offering that same way of looking at it to other people. And I found that it is helpful for me and for them. And that's that's the best of both worlds.
Yeah. And I think there's a connection there too with the concept of starting a community around a specific topic. And what I like about how Mighty Networks frames it is that, rather than considering myself looking at verbal to visual as, I'm the teacher, I'm the instructor, I'm the professor. Instead of those labels, it's host. I'm a host of this community. I'm learning alongside the people who choose to show up here. Because like you said, the community members are going to teach each other and teach me just as much as I might teach them. And that's another one of those things that kind of takes the pressure off of feeling like you need to put yourself up on this pedestal and be the person with the wisdom shouting down to the masses. It doesn't have to be that way.
No.
And there's a connection also with those communities that gather around a specific topic, a specific interest that can also ease the way into learning in public, in that we've often described verbal to visual as it's kind of a semi-public place. It's a safe space for people who are interested in sketchnoting to share their work in a way that they might not share it in a public-facing blog. So for people that are interested in this idea of learning in public, but kind of there's that fear of doing it, the verbal to visual community, kind of online learning hub, can be this place where you get more comfortable sharing your work with the supportive community that can be a building block if you choose to maybe start sharing your work in other formats as well. Yeah,
where you aren't going to get somebody's snarky comment, because as much as we all want to say that doesn't affect us, it could at least ruin an hour or two of your day.
Oh, for sure.
If not more. And I think it's really great to have spaces like that are free of that. And they're not just free of it, they're sort of focused in the opposite direction, lifting people up. On Mighty Networks, for example, it's not even it's a cheer, and it feels like that because it's that much of a different kind of community. So I think that's such a great concept for making that first step to new work, a new thing, a new gig. What I was also really interested in was your, I think you wrote a Medium post on deep work, which was based on a book you had read. And again, this goes to what is so, what I like. I have such a crush on your processes. I've just been really, really so into both the way you teach and what you share. So, could you talk a little bit about adopting that deep work process, kind of how it works for you? And then part of what I noticed you kind of glanced over in it is a time of meditation in your day, which is something I do too. So tell me about both of those things.
Yeah. So deep work is a term in a book coined by this author named Cal Newport. And when I think about his work, a couple books had a pretty significant impact, kind of side by side. First Deep Work, and then his book Digital Minimalism, which I think came in that order. I think Deep Work came first. And the concept of deep work is the value that comes from spending long periods of interrupted time focused on a particular task or project. And by long stretches, it's, 90 minutes to 2 hours, where, you don't have your email browser open, you don't have your phone notifications on, you're not getting the dings that distract you and pull your attention away from it. You're not in an open office space where anyone can come up and pull you away because of the detrimental impacts. Talk about the hangover of social media use. There's some form of hangover after any social interaction that we have that takes a long time, even if it's a tiny little like notification that you read, like how long it actually takes you to fully refocus and kind of dig back in to the level of concentration that you had on the task that you were doing before that ding happened.
Right.
That kind of just pulls you out of the flow of work. So that's what the concept of deep work is. That really resonated with me because I noticed how little of it I had maybe at the time when I read it. So that was a helpful piece in answering that question that I first had to confront when I stopped substitute teaching. How the hell do you structure your days when you have the full day to yourself and you need to get stuff done?
Yeah.
So I kind of started trying to implement those ideas. Digital minimalism was kind of the next place where it encourages you to look hard at the technologies that you bring into your life. And it's not prescriptive. It's just about intentionality, understanding what you bring in and why. So those books kind of helped me pull back from social media completely, try to even pull back. The trap that I still run into sometimes is YouTube consumption, because there's a lot of interesting ideas there and, rabbit holes you could go down. That's still probably my Achilles heel when it crops up. But
boy, out of all the things, all the places that could grab your attention online, I have to say YouTube is certainly the one that's filled with more value. And I've gotten away from TikTok and Instagram scrolling myself. I do a little bit of it just to kind of keep up with people, and I want to see what some people are posting and doing. But YouTube really does have a lot of value. And I found the same thing for myself, is that my motto used to be, in my free time, I devise more schemes to make more free time. And so getting a structured workday has always been a challenge. It still is. I'm really looking forward to this, to trying deep work. So you do it in 3 segments a day, pretty much. Have you found that works, or have you like been living with this process for a little bit and made changes to it? How's it panning out?
Yeah, it definitely shifts over time. At one point I did write a Medium article when I had kind of landed on a daily structure that felt really good. And I stuck with that. Yeah, I think there were 2 or 3 chunks of, 90 minutes or so of uninterrupted time to devote to a particular thing that I was working on. Life circumstances led to like a change in that schedule. I think at the time my girlfriend and I were living together in a house we rented. Now in life we're married, we bought a house, we got a dog, and 1.5 years ago my wife had twin boys.
Congratulations.
So we're like relatively new parents. Thank you. But that, the commitments, the responsibilities, that shifts for everyone throughout life in different phases and all that. So what I have found to be useful, this is where the meditation and mindfulness kind of comes in really nicely, is setting up to the degree that you can, paying attention to the structure of your day and setting up kind of some hour-long, 90-minute-long blocks where you can do uninterrupted work. But then equally important for me has been developing the sense of awareness and this mindfulness that might be practiced and developed during maybe a sitting meditation session, but that you then carry with you throughout your day, so that as you're going through your day, responding to things that come up, deciding where to put your time and attention next, you're not on autopilot. Right. You're at least temporarily giving yourself the opportunity to step back and kind of check in with what's going on inside and what's going on externally, to kind of make a decision about, okay, based on what's going on right now, you know, my own energy, the needs of others around me, whatever the case may be, leaving open the space to make some decisions in the moment, based on what is actually needed. And sometimes that can run in contrast to what feels like is going to be the most productive in the moment.
Right.
I definitely have gone through eras where I've like, you know, been on the productivity kick and like tried to focus really hard on those, you know, best practices to be the most productive.
Right.
Now though, like productivity isn't a North Star of mine. Really mindfulness and presence is much more of a North Star for me. And, for a while it was kind of a daily meditation practice that helped get that going in the beginning of the day, experimenting with different sources for that meditation. At one point, you know, using the app Headspace and just using their, the resources. But it was about, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, maybe less, that I came across a person whose work resonated with me on a much deeper level, a guy named Thomas Hubel, who is, I found because of the YouTube algorithms, suggested a video of his, and I'm like, who's this guy? And I don't even remember what the specific topic of that video was, but what I appreciate about his teaching is that, in contrast to my initial experience with meditation, which was too much focused like up here in the head.
Right.
Even though, you know, at some point in the meditation, you would do this body scan and pay attention to your body, put your awareness there. It kind of always came back here, and it was too much on, or there was a lot of focus on, you know, paying attention to your thoughts, not blocking them, letting them flow. But what I like about this guy, Thomas Hubel, is that it's much more about bringing your awareness into your body and like, and keeping it there, coming down into that space, and just being curious about what you find, and relating that to potential trauma in your past.
Sure.
Could be personal traumatic experiences, could be collective trauma, which is kind of one of his areas of focus, which is also really intriguing to me. Whether it's, you know, survivors of the Holocaust or descendants of survivors or victims of the Holocaust, or folks who are affected by racism. There are a lot of collective traumas that exist for just about any community that you might consider.
Well, and then we all have our own, like, you know, even if it's not a capital T trauma, like the Holocaust, we all have traumas from our childhood that still have a place inside of us. And I agree that getting into the body can be such a useful practice, because we all tend to think that we're a person who is, you know, like a homunculus, basically, like living inside, somewhere inside our head, looking out the windows of our eyes, pointing them at things and using our hands to then manipulate the environment around us. And that is an incredible amount of responsibility that when you break it down, we don't actually even have at all in the way we think we do. And so I think for me, that's been a huge thing in mindfulness too. And a big part of what I teach is coming into the body and going, okay, we think we're here. This is where we start, because that's just how we've been raised. But if we start to look inside for like, where else are we? You know, it's a very interesting process. Like, who is the us in our gut? Who's the us here in our heart center? And if we can actually, like, there was in the movie Little Big Man, which I loved when I was a child, the chief of one of the Native American tribes goes blind, and he says the cord between my heart and my eyes got cut. And I thought, what an interesting way of looking at seeing. You know, if all my life I've just thought, you know, like brain, eyes. But really, when you think about what happens if I see with my heart, and that's something that you could actually, that's a way you could live. That kind of stuff can be, like a real revelation. So tell me again the name of of the guy you found on YouTube. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah, his name is Thomas Hubel. The last name is been spelled in a couple of different ways, I think, kind of depending on where in the world maybe he's sharing it, but I think it's Huebl.
Okay.
Is one of the spellings. And it's been coming into his work was also another kind of interesting case study of learning communities, because he, for the longest time gave in-person events and trainings and meditation retreats, those sorts of things. And then during one of those, folks kind of started just naturally gathering in the morning for coffee and having these conversations about, I don't know, the topics of the previous day or just what's going on, and like these rich discussions that were outside of, the formal trainings that were part of that retreat.
Right. And
they started calling that the Mystic Cafe, because it just kept happening. And they chose to, in an effort to keep that going, keep that energy going, they kind of started an online version of that with the same name. That's a monthly gathering where kind of Thomas hops on and shares some thoughts, does some teaching, leads some meditations, and brings people on who, share the current thing that they're experiencing or struggling with. So you see kind of some one-on-one work, and, no matter how different the person is that comes on to share is from you or their experiences, there's always something that's going to resonate in that.
Sure.
So anyway, I joined that. I joined the Mystic Cafe, and it's been really interesting to hop back. And I think it started in maybe middle of 2019. And sometimes I tap into the new monthly sessions, but it's fun to go back and start from the beginning of that online learning community and then kind of watch each month, because there's so much I'm learning from each of those talks. And seeing the value of gathering together in this community. And with this topic in particular, how helpful it can be to have this kind of collective, like resonant body of people, even through the internet. And he talks about this directly, of the value of that space and that cup, that container, to help individuals process. Yeah, so that's been some of my experience with Thomas Hubel. He also just this will be the last thing I mention on this topic, I guess. But in addition to that community, the things that he's sharing there, he also helps. He's one of the people involved in like a collective trauma summit that, the time we're recording it, at least it's coming out right now, where I want to say there are like 250 different speakers from around the globe that are kind of exploring this topic of collective trauma, coming at it from this mindfulness perspective. So it's very helpful to also, get tap into those other perspectives.
It's so true, because I think that having discussions around trauma, especially, and when you can add mindfulness to it to get that bigger picture, we start to not only cultivate compassion for other people, going, wow, okay, that person who may be, I'm experiencing the angry side of that person. That anger may be from something like what makes me angry. That's something in my past. And so we don't just get compassion for others, we get compassion for ourselves. And when you put both those things together, it's incredibly powerful, because it changes the way we move through the world. And this has been one of my big learnings in learning mindfulness and now teaching it, is that as we get in touch with that self-compassion and that compassion for others, it gives us the first inklings of that quiet that we're all looking for. Because when, like you said, your first experience with mindfulness is like, oh my God, like I spent most of my day trying to not think about how many thoughts I was having and just, like doing something to get away from that. When you realize how many there are and what's actually going on, it can be overwhelming. And a lot of people, I think, start mindfulness and go, no, thanks. That was better before. But getting past that and finding that, okay, it's more like having a TV on in the other room than like something blaring in both ears. It becomes easier to live with those thoughts, but we also find different places in our body and in life that we can operate from and live from. Mm-hmm. And one of those things for me has been getting in touch with my own intuition, that kind of, what Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within you, and Buddha talked about it too. All major religions have touched on this, that everything we need to know is within us. And so intuition has become a big part of my own path. And we were chatting about this on Verbal to Visual. One of the best tools I've found along this path of intuition has been sketchnoting, because it was the first time I ever could just like go straight from intuition into the world without going through my mind. And it reminded me of a time as a child when I freely sketched and doodled all the time. Even as a young adult, whenever I was on the phone, I would always be like drawing things or making, like little circles and lines and connecting them. And it was something that I think a lot of us do. I also think a lot of us just leave it behind and go, oh, that was something I used to do. And it's childish instead of childlike, which is actually bringing us back to a time before we were so racked with ego concerns and a mind that, was driving our decisions. I'm curious if you've had any sort of the same experience with sketchnoting, and what your own personal experience with intuition is.
Yeah, good question. I think for me, the initial pull of sketchnoting still came from this place and not so much from this place, in that I kind of saw it as this tool. There's even this term like external brain or second brain, that if, people get into knowledge management systems, you've probably come across this term of like, okay, I want to create this space. Maybe it's in journals, maybe it's in computer programs where I can capture and organize all of my ideas, and have that as a reference so that I don't have to keep everything up here. There's a little bit of that was kind of my experience coming into sketchnoting, and the appeal of it was in part because of that. Like when you sketch something out, or even write it out and have these external references, there is that benefit that like you don't have to hold as much in your own mind because you've got these external artifacts to work with. Total benefit. And I think for me, what felt most natural about that and what gets closest to what you're describing is this kind of sense of embodiment. Another term in kind of the concept of embodied cognition kind of speaks to the fact that your brain isn't distinct from your body. You can't just separate it out. Like the way our brain functions and works is a direct result of our physical experiences in the world. And what I find enjoyable about sketchnoting, especially whenever I kind of go large scale with it, whether I'm standing up on a wall or just have like big poster paper across my desk and can make these like larger marks, is that you get more of your whole body into the experience. Sure. And it kind of taps into, I think, a deeper well of knowledge and a deeper well of intuition, compared to, the scrunched up just writing down in words. So I think that's kind of where I have felt that, is giving myself space, allowing myself to draw. Because once you bring in that visual component, I think those, by capturing ideas, and for me and for most people, it's rarely just visuals. You're still jotting down like resonant phrases and like helpful ideas and things like that in words, but allowing yourself to add even simple stick figure drawings or little scenes or objects that are connected to whatever it is that you're exploring. I think that helps you kind of enter the world of those ideas to some degree, like, you know, physically, like put yourself into that space instead of just intellectualizing those ideas. So I think that kind of gets at what you felt and experienced in terms of being able to kind of get that intuition on paper, kind of like in one go.
Yeah. The biggest difference for me was going from a lifetime of having paper around and always like jotting things down, but like writing far too quickly. I mean, it's to the point where sometimes I couldn't even read my own writing. And then like always looking for a piece of paper for just a random something that I'm like, I know I wrote that down somewhere. And I still do that. I think I have one of those pieces of paper right here. But adding sketchnoting to it has given me like, I'm getting better with the messy note taking I used to take and realizing how much was missing from it. You know, like that I wasn't actually, I wasn't holding on to ideas like you said in the beginning when we first started talking, that you like, I would read a book or I would write a note and it wouldn't, just writing it down, the process of doing that wasn't really helping. But with sketchnoting, it really does. And it also gives me an opportunity to synthesize things with my body mind in a way that just jotting things down or even typing on a keyboard never has. So it's just been so incredibly valuable. And I want to thank you again for that, because it isn't just the sketchnoting, it's you and your way of teaching it and your community, and just the whole thing made it very accessible to somebody like me who, my big thing in life has been resistance. You know, all my trauma just points to resist. I've been a resistor my whole life. And part of what I'm coming to now in my mid-50s is realizing how the benefits of surrender, which is the opposite of resistance. And this is a process that I can really surrender to, and know that it allows me to tap into something that I haven't found too many other ways in life to get to. So I think it's fantastic. And I'm so happy that you've gone through this journey of yours and come to this place and made this to share with other people.
Well, thank you. It's so great to hear that you've had such a positive experience with sketchnoting specifically, and kind of the work that I've put out there in the community we've got going. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to spending more time there and meeting more of the other folks that are in the community. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Ditto. I've enjoyed this conversation very much. Thanks for having it with me.